When you think about it, the idea of someone handing you food is objectively kind of disturbing. Think about it for a second. A complete stranger is preparing your food. Another complete stranger is driving up to your location. Then you have an interaction with a stranger who is a foot away from you. What's even more disturbing is when this happens, and you didn't even ask for any food. About 5 years ago, I was dog-sitting my old roommate's dog. I didn't mind at all since I figured I would just stay at his house. I lived there for 2 years, so I didn't feel weird or anything. He had the dog when I lived there, so I already had a great relationship with the little dog. In my mind, this was going to be an easy thing. His dog was basically the easiest dog in the world to take care of. I swear she was part cat or something. You could fill her food bowl once, and she would eat it throughout the day. Most dogs I've seen go crazy when you fill their bowl. But no, this little dog never barked. She would go outside twice a day to do her business. At that point in my life, I was also looking for some space and time alone. I was coming to the end of a long-term relationship. I thought that space was just what I needed for a few days to clear my mind. This house was beautiful. It had a finished basement with a comically large fireplace next to a huge TV. I figured I would just settle in there for the few days that I would be house-sitting. My job was boring at the time and could be done from my computer at home. So, I set up my laptop, grabbed some snacks, and basically lived in the basement for a few days with the little dog. By Friday night, I was feeling a little lonely. I had been there since Wednesday and hadn't left the house or seen anyone yet. I called a couple of friends over to watch some college basketball games and just hang out for the night. We ordered pizza and wings around 7:30 at night, and they were delicious. However, this is not the unfortunate part of my story. My friends left around midnight. I cleaned up a bit and then decided to get ready for bed. Once I laid down on the couch, I ended up turning my laptop on and starting some work, just because I wasn't sleepy yet. A little after 1 a.m., I thought I heard the doorbell coming through my headphones. I took the headphones off and laid still for a moment, my heart starting to beat fast. When almost a minute passed and I heard nothing, I felt a lot better. I figured it must have been a noise or something in the music I was listening to that sounded like a doorbell. But then, I heard it again, clear as day, a doorbell. Being in the basement, I had the slight advantage of being able to see the driveway. The window was right above my head, but if I stood on my tiptoes, I could see the driveway. To my surprise, more than my horror, there was a car running in the driveway with its headlights on. I couldn't tell what kind of car it was from where I was because of the bright lights. My first thought was that one of my friends who had been there earlier had come back. I thought maybe they had forgotten their phone or something, and that's why they showed up. I walked up the stairs and approached the door cautiously. I had all the lights off on the upper floor and only had the outside light on above the front door. As I got closer to the door, I couldn't make out the details of the person at the door. It looked like he was wearing a hood and then another brown jacket over the hood. As I got to the door, I opened it a crack. Luckily, there was another screen door in front of that door that was also locked. "Can I help you with something?" I said with some reluctance in my voice. The person grabbed the handle of the screen door and noticed it was locked. He took a small step back. At that point, I didn't even see it as anything alarming. It just happened so fast. I thought it was an instinct on his part to open the door. He made a little noise, I think, and then said in an almost timid voice, "Hey, yo, I got your small pizza and wings." Then he held up a brown paper bag that was rolled up at the top. Still, I was trying to make out the details of his face, but he was holding his head down at a downward angle. With a very annoyed voice, I said, "It's 1 a.m. I didn't order a pizza." The guy looked nervously around and then back at me and said, Yes, you did order it. This is the address I have in the order." Then he kept repeating the address, which was, in fact, the address of the house he was at. But I slammed the door in his face and yelled at him, "Well, you have the wrong address. Good night." I went back down to the basement and was incredibly annoyed at that point. Right as I sat down on the couch, the doorbell rang again. I went back to the window and saw the guy's car was still running. Luckily, the dog was sleeping through this whole doorbell thing, so I didn't have to deal with her barking on top of everything else that was going on. I called my friends and asked them if they had played a prank on me, since I was going to be home alone in the house. all of my friends who had been there were already home and in bed. Also, it's worth mentioning my friends aren't the type to really pull pranks like that, especially one as elaborate as this. I then tried to call the pizza place we had ordered from earlier. Maybe something fishy happened in the system, and they accidentally put in my address for another order. But when I looked the number up online, they had closed at 10 p.m., so it wasn't that pizza place. It had just been about 2 minutes since I looked out the window, but the car was still there. Then the doorbell rang once again. I contemplated getting back up, but I noticed the delivery guy finally getting back in his car. The relief didn't last long, however. He got in the car, turned it off, and then just sat in it. He didn't leave and seemed to be talking on the phone. I was hoping maybe he really was a delivery guy, and they just had the wrong address. He was talking to his boss or something. Call me crazy, but I don't think I've ever met a delivery guy that was that persistent. I tried to look at the license plate number, but it was kind of faded. I could only see it starting with JOT, but that's all I could make out. He eventually backed into the driveway and left. I was a little worried, though, because he drove really slowly and didn't turn on his lights. He just rolled away in the car. I thought this awkward situation was finally over, and I wasn't in the mindset to work anymore. So, I decided I would finally try to sleep. I turned off the TV and sat down to listen to some music in front of a soft fire. In between songs, I thought I heard a car engine. I got up from the couch and looked out the window, and there it was, the same car again. This time, it was parked in front of the house with no lights on. I snuck into the owner's bedroom to see if I could get a better view. I'm not sure if he saw me, but then he was gone again. I hid behind the curtain and looked out the window for the next half hour. The car kept driving by every few minutes. I was freaking out at that point because I knew something wasn't right. I grabbed the dog and my laptop and locked the door to the bedroom upstairs. I was paranoid, but I felt safe doing this. Shortly after 2:30 in the morning, the doorbell rang again. I looked out the window and I didn't see any cars this time. Then, I heard a bunch of knocking on the door, and that same voice from before said loudly, "Your pizza. I have your delivery, sir. Your food is getting cold." I sat there in silence and didn't do or say anything. I should have called the police right then, or at least told the guy I was calling the police. But it wasn't my house, and I'd never called the police before, so I just wasn't thinking straight. Then the knocking stopped. I no longer heard the voice, and I did not see the car. It was so calm as could be. I sat and stared at the ceiling all night until the sun came up. I fed the little dog and let her out into the backyard. I quickly looked around for a few minutes while we were outside and then ran back into the house. I made sure I had an empty container where you put the wings and added it to the bottom of the bag. I felt sick as the thoughts flooded my head, thinking of everything that could have happened. I drove off, and when I got to the end of the street, I saw what I thought could have been the car from the night before. It was a dark sedan with a license plate that started with JOT. I called the owner of the house right away, and he didn't seem too concerned. So we just talked it over for a little while, and I left it at that. Nothing ever happened again in regards to that incident. I asked my friend countless times if anyone had ever shown up at his house since that night, and he said he'd never experienced anything like that. I have no idea what happened or what kind of danger I was actually in. It was the most uncomfortable and scary night of my life. I know that may be irrational, but I haven't ordered pizza or any other type of food since. If you're enjoying the video, please subscribe the channel for future videos, and like and share with your friends. So, last month, the most strange and disturbing thing happened to me while I was delivering a pizza. I started this pizza delivery job a few months ago to make some extra money on the weekends. I will say this, anyone looking for a little extra money should consider delivering pizzas. I know it's not glamorous, but depending on where you work, you can make some decent money. For the most part, I never had any interesting stories about my deliveries. I've heard people describe all sorts of things about their experiences, from being invited to a party to someone I worked with being invited in after dropping off the pizza. Months later, he ended up marrying that woman. But for me, it was always business as usual until about a month ago. In the area I deliver to, there aren't many apartment buildings. It's mostly a residential neighborhood, with only a few business parks. However, there is one immensely large apartment building within our delivery area. The apartments are new, but the building itself is quite old, dating back to the early 1900s. The building was some sort of warehouse or factory. I think they made candles or something random. But for the most part, it had been abandoned for the last 40 years. They recently renovated the entire building and created these beautiful apartments. They are spacious with open floor plans. Because the warehouse was huge, they were able to add a ton of apartments. I think the cheapest apartment in the entire building is $2,000 for a one-bedroom. You basically need to have some money to be able to afford one of these apartments. When I arrived on Saturday night, I got a call to deliver a pizza to this building. I was excited to see it for myself. Up until that point, I had only seen pictures. Ordinarily, I don't love delivering to apartments. It's not the apartment's fault. It's just that sometimes it can be annoying trying to navigate which is the right building, especially when it's dark out. But not this time. This time, I was excited to deliver to these apartments, and selfishly, I was hoping to get a nice tip. The drive should have taken me about 10 minutes, but it ended up being almost 20 minutes due to the weather. It was horrible, raining and storming so hard outside that visibility was almost non-existent. When I got to the massive building, I pressed the button for the pizza address. They unlocked the door, and I stood in the lobby. There were two elevators, one to my left and one to my right. At the end of the hall, right in front of me, was another door that led to the stairs. I don't like elevators, so I decided to take the stairs, even though it was on the 6th floor. I got to the floor and started making my way through the confusing hallways. It looked like a maze on that floor. I assumed the floor was a big square with rooms all around the perimeter, but they had a lot of curves that honestly left me stumped. From the outside of the building, it was just a big rectangle, but inside it was like something out of an abstract painting. I was walking quickly down the hallway, looking at all the numbers, trying to find my delivery address. Then, without warning, the power went out. It was completely dark where I was. Of course, my cell phone was in the car, so I didn't have any lights with me. The hallway was completely dark. I had no idea where I was or how far the stairs were. It was like I had entered a house of mirrors. I tried to use one hand to guide myself around the wall, and with the other hand, I was holding the pizza and the wings firmly. If you're afraid of the dark, this would have been enough to make me fall apart. But unfortunately, it gets worse. As I tried to keep my composure, I heard a door slowly open and then abruptly close. It sounded close, right in front of me, but I didn't see anything. If someone had left their apartment, they weren't using a light to navigate. So, I figured it was probably whoever had ordered the pizza and was just checking to see if I was at their door yet. I decided to yell out, "Hey, I have your pizza." There was a brief silence, and then a voice emerged from the darkness. It couldn't have been more than 10 feet away, and it said in a low, raspy voice, "I didn't order pizza." I went silent and stopped moving. I wanted to turn around and go back to the stairs, but at this point, I had already passed a bunch of doors, and I wouldn't know which one was the one for the stairs. As I stood still, waiting for the power to come back, the voice emerged again, this time right in front of me. I could feel the heat of their breath on my skin, and they said, "Are you coming with me?" Luckily, I was holding the pizza because this person tried to grab me but ended up grabbing the pizza box. I threw the box, turned around, and ran back the way I came. I don't know why I wasn't screaming for help. I think I was just paranoid of giving away my position. As I ran down the dark hallway, I tried every doorknob I passed until I found one that wasn't locked. Luckily, it was the one by the stairs. The stairs had these emergency lights on, so I could dimly see where I was going. I ran outside, got in my car, and drove back to the pizza place in the rain. I told my boss everything, and we decided to call the police. The person who ordered the pizza called, furious because her order had been dumped in the hallway. But I didn't care. I gave my statement to the police, who informed the building management. But as of this writing, a month later, nothing has happened. I found out that the floor I was on was also supposed to have emergency lights working, but for some reason, they weren't. I'm still not sure if this was some cruel joke to scare someone in the dark, or if the strange person meant to hurt me. Either way, I'm thankful that the pizza box saved my life that night. At this point, I'm just happy to have a crazy delivery story that I can finally share. If anything happens, I will definitely write a follow-up. But right now, there's an insane man in the dark, just waiting to strike. I've had more jobs than I can count on both hands at this point, and I have yet to find one that satisfies me. Someone in my position, with no college education and no real skills in the working world, really struggles to find and then keep employment. Every customer service job I've had has ended very ugly. A couple of years ago, I was even arrested and escorted off the property of the store I worked at because I may have accidentally threatened a customer. In my defense, he called me something I shouldn't have said, and I maybe responded with a few words too many. That was a long time ago, and I'd like to tell you that I've changed, but sadly, I'm still the same as always. As I approach my 30s, I decided years ago that I needed to do something with my life. That eventually led me to the best decision I've made in a long time, going back to school. I'm studying computer science online, and I'm enjoying it. What I like most is that human contact is limited. What I quickly realized, though, is that school is incredibly expensive. I was almost out of money. As a result of my employment history and background, I was having a very hard time finding a job. This time, I finally found a pizza place near my house that was hiring a delivery person. I figured since human interaction would be limited, it couldn't go too wrong. Clearly, I was mistaken. The first few weeks were uneventful. I delivered a lot of pizzas and barely said 2 words to the people ordering them. A lot of people even asked me to just leave the pizza at the door, which was even more ideal. Then I met Samantha. Sweet Samantha. Apparently, the people at the store knew this woman and considered her a nightmare. I guess she always ordered the pizza with weird special instructions that honestly made no sense. If anyone has ever worked a service job, you'll know what I mean when people ask for the stupidest things. My supervisor that night, who happened to be the owner's son, thought it would be funny to let me deliver the pizza to Samantha, considering my history with other humans. He didn't know before delivering that I was headed to Sweet Samantha's house. When I pulled into the driveway, a frantic middle-aged woman came running out of the house wearing a robe and curlers in her hair. No joke. She was waving her arms in the air and yelling at me, "Are you crazy? Get out of my driveway. That's only for the owners of the house. Don't make me call the police." I could already feel my heart racing. In a calm voice, especially for me, I said to Samantha, "Ma'am, I just have your pizza. Do you want me to leave it here or what?" The woman screamed at the top of her lungs, then yelled at me again, "I won't ask you again. Move your car now." A few years ago, I probably would have thrown the pizza at the lady, but somehow, I got the patience to get back to my car and move it out to the street. I got out and started walking toward the front door. I spread the pizza, trying to give it to her, but she kept telling me no. I looked at her like she was holding a dead body or something. Upset, I said, "Are you going to take your pizza?" Samantha looked at me with her mouth half open and her eyes full of fury. In an instant, her eyes went wide, and she said, "This is all wrong. This is wrong. How dare you?" I was beyond confused at that point. I was basically done with this and said, "Whatever." I placed the pizza gently in the driveway of the house and started walking back to my car. I'm a big guy, and this was a small woman, so I was shocked when the next thing I knew, the woman jumped on my back and started hitting me in the back of the head like a drum. As she beat me, she continued to scream, "This is all wrong. This is not even the right box." I couldn't even begin to understand what she was talking about. Was she mad that the pizza was in a different box? I was finally able to gently lift her off my back and set her down on the ground. I was upset and getting angrier, but the last thing I wanted was to accidentally hurt this poor woman. I got to my car, and when I looked up, I saw the woman running toward my car with a knife in her hand. That was the last straw for me. I started the car and looked in the rearview mirror to see her standing at the end of the driveway, waving the knife in the air like it was a flag or something. I didn't call the police, and believe me, I know that was stupid, considering this woman legitimately threatened me. But I was afraid of getting in trouble. I've had a lot of trouble with the law in the past, and 9 times out of 10, I'm the one to blame. I was just afraid that, in case the system failed, I didn't want to jeopardize the only good thing I have in my life, and that's school and pretty much this job. I didn't tell the guys at the store exactly what happened. I just told them to never, ever have me deliver there again. The more time goes by, the more grateful I am to be alive. I have no idea where she got the knife. That woman was hanging on my back, and I couldn't see her. At some point, she decided to pull it out, and maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't be writing this. Life is weird, my friends, and crazy things happen all the time, especially when you least expect it, and so on. That's how my adventure as a pizza delivery man ended. Now, I'm moving forward with my studies, hoping that one day, I can put all these bad experiences behind me and find a better path. Most people have experienced some form of heartbreak, and everyone deals with it differently and in their own way. For me, it was with pizza, and embarrassingly, Tinder. Both left me feeling like I had been hit by a truck. After a few, let's call them Tinder dates, I decided I had had enough of Tinder, at least for a little while. Things get weird, and sometimes they almost get scary. I decided the best way to deal with this loneliness was to order an amazing pizza loaded with fries. I will say this, if you have never experienced the glorious abundance of a pizza loaded with fries, you need to change that. I immediately ordered my pizza, and about 45 minutes later, the doorbell rang. A beautiful woman was delivering my pizza. Now, I know anyone can deliver food, but I personally have never seen such a beautiful woman delivering pizza. At that point, I made some dumb jokes when I opened the door, and she laughed. I thought it was now or never to make a move. Gotta seize the opportunity when it's hot, I guess. So, I asked if she wanted to hang out, and to my surprise, she said when she got done working after that delivery, she would love to chill out. I was excited, maybe more excited than I was about my pizza. She said she needed to go home and freshen up and that she would come over later, around 10 p.m. We exchanged numbers, and I decided I should probably freshen up myself. 10 o'clock came around, and she never showed up. I waited a bit and finally texted her, asking where she was. I got no reply until about 11:15. I was mad at that point, but as soon as she said she was coming, I forgot how mad I was and agreed to let her still come over. Before I knew it, it was already midnight, and she still wasn't there. I finally started listening to my brain for once and decided to text her, telling her not to come over. She replied, saying that she was almost there and that she really wanted to hang out. I was upset, and I decided that it would probably be like all my other Tinder dates if I let her come over. So, I stood my ground and told her that I wanted to go to sleep that night and maybe we could hang out another time in the future. She responded with a simple message that only had a laughing face emoji. I thought it was a weird response, but I let it go and decided to go to bed. I had no idea what time it was, but sometime during the night, I was woken up by the doorbell ringing. Cautiously, I made my way to the door, but no one was there. Just behind the front door is my living room, and in the living room is a back door that leads out to my patio. As I looked at the front door, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned around and swore I saw someone running near my back door. I crept up to that door and thought I could hear giggling and whispering through the door. I couldn't make out any words, and I guess it could have been the wind, but it definitely sounded like voices. A few moments later, my worst fears came true. As I was sitting by the back door, I looked across the room toward the front door and saw what I thought were 5 people. Whoever was up front began repeatedly ringing the doorbell. I yelled from across the room, "What do you want?" They stopped ringing the doorbell, and then a deep, loud voice answered, "We want to hang out. Don't we? Want to hang out?" I yelled out a threat, saying I was going to call the police, but I had no intention of calling them, hoping the threat would work. Then, I heard a bubbly female voice yelling, "They'll never get here in time." Now, panic started to set in. I ran back to my room and grabbed my phone to call the police. The whole time I was in my room, they kept ringing the doorbell and banging on the door. Half the time, I was expecting them to break the door down at any moment. About 5 minutes later, I saw the police car lights shining through my window, and I ran back into the living room. The group of people were gone, and I let the cops in so they could take my statement. I told them about the girl from the pizza place and that I was sure it was her and most likely her friends. The cops didn't seem too interested, if I'm honest. They asked me if I saw any cars either when the woman delivered my pizza or when the intruders were supposedly there, and unfortunately I didn't see any cars. At that point, they asked me if I had any proof that it was this girl, and of course I didn't. I didn't even know the girl's name. She was listed as Pizza Girl in my phone. Unfortunately, you can't accuse someone based on a feeling. I tried to text her that night, and she replied right away, which indicated to me that she was awake. She claimed that I was crazy. I could be right, and sadly, I was just the target of a group of crazy people that night, and this poor girl just got caught in the crossfire. But I don't think so. Everything seemed weird from the start. She agreed to hang out with a stranger after delivering a pizza. Yeah, stranger things have happened, but that raises a red flag. She said she would be there at 10 and then kept putting it off, saying she was almost there. The weird laughing text, and then the intruders saying things like, "Do you want to hang out?" Everything seemed weird and oddly suspicious. Nothing has happened since that night, but I assure you, I don't sleep well anymore, and I haven't ordered pizza since then. I still have her number in my phone, and maybe now that I've written the story, I'll text the pizza girl to see if she wants to hang out. A few years ago, I was able to open an amazing pizza place with my brother. Business was going great and we worked well together. My brother and I cooked the pizzas and wings, and our wives took the orders and ran the cash register. Usually, hiring was simple. Just let me know when you're going to quit so I can make arrangements. This worked for a while and honestly still works today. The only thing I wasn't prepared for, though, was for my delivery guy to call in to cancel a shift. It was a Saturday night, and of course we were busy. My brother was out of work for a month due to a minor surgery he had, so I was incredibly busy. My delivery guy called in sick, which I can't really question. I was able to get a friend to come help me out, but he wasn't licensed, so I had to deliver the pizzas while he cooked, and my wife answered the phones. Everything seemed to be going well. Stressful, of course, but well. I was making my last round of deliveries of the night when I pulled up to a house where they were having a loud party. I walked up to the door with 3 pizzas and 2 young men opened the door. It was obvious they were college kids, and they definitely had a little too much to drink. But it's a college town, and I'm not one to judge. I handed them the pizzas, and while one of them was trying to get money out to tip me, I saw my delivery guy, who had called to cancel, standing in the room behind the girl. Without thinking, I yelled, "David, what are you doing?" He turned around, saw me, and then just ran off like I was going to chase him or something. I wasn't mad, not mad enough to chase the poor guy anyway. The 2 girls looked confused, and I made a joke out of it. I told them if they saw David, to give him a good kicking for me. I was mad about the situation, but I get it. Like I said, it's a college town, and I know these kids just want to hang out and have fun. I probably would have been a little upset about it, but I wouldn't have been that mad. I'm not that kind of boss. That night, I told my wife about seeing David, and she had the same reaction as I did. She called him some ridiculous name I can't remember, and we shared a laugh about the situation. We had a couple of drinks to close out the night, and then we went to bed around 1 a.m. I hadn't yet fully fallen asleep when I thought I heard a noise outside the window. We live in a single-story ranch-type house, so someone might be standing right outside my bedroom window. It sounded like something was knocking and tapping on the window. I woke my wife up and asked her if she heard it too, and she did. After a short deliberation, she told me to pull the curtain back and see if anyone was there. My logical brain was telling me there wasn't anyone, but something didn't feel right. I pulled the curtain back, and to my relief, there was nothing there. I thought I might have seen some sort of fingerprint smudge on the glass, but I was sure it was my mind playing tricks on me. We both rolled over to go back to sleep, but I wanted to get a glass of water before bed. I headed into the kitchen, and it was then that I saw someone trying to break in through my sliding glass kitchen door. I immediately jumped to the side, hoping the darkness would cover me. My phone was right next to the bed, so I couldn't call the police and was too scared to move. You can't even imagine how terrifying it is to see a figure actively trying to open your door in the middle of the night. It gives me the chills right now just typing this and reliving that memory. I finally worked up the courage to run back into the bedroom and called the police immediately. My wife jumped up, and I told her to hide in the closet. I grabbed my golf club out of the club bag and slowly made my way down the hall again. The figure was now trying to open the window over the sink and was succeeding. The window was small, but it was moving, unlike all the other windows and doors. Once he almost managed to open the window all the way, he raised his head, and we met eyes for the first time. It was my delivery guy, David. I yelled out his name and stared at him in disbelief as the guy stared at me from the window over my sink. He went pale as a ghost and, instead of continuing to try to climb through the window, he just backed up and ran away. Stupidly, I tried to call him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The police arrived several minutes later, and I made a decision that probably most people wouldn't have taken. I didn't give the police David's name. I told them I saw an intruder trying to break in and that he ran when he saw me. I gave a statement and they left. I never saw David again. He never showed up at the store, and he never showed up at my house again. Maybe once he realized the police weren't chasing him, he realized I didn't report him. Or maybe he had too much to drink that night and wasn't thinking clearly. Either way, kids make mistakes, and I just hope wherever David is today, he's okay. At that time, he didn't have kids yet, because if he had, maybe that story would have ended differently. I have no idea what David intended to do that night, whether he just wanted to rob my house or actually hurt us. I'm thankful that at that point, he found some sense and actually ran. I know we caught him that night with his friends, and he was a little disoriented, I'm guessing from drinking, but I didn't really hold a grudge against him. So, the fact that he ended up at my house and tried to break in, I don't know if it was a coincidence or if he really had any bad intentions. But David, if you're still out there, sincerely, I hope you're okay. My mid-20s was a rough time in my life. I got laid off from the job I got right out of college, and I couldn't pay my rent, so I moved back home with my parents. I was slightly depressed and didn't even want to contemplate a new career choice yet. When I was only 22, I was on track to make $100,000 a year, and that number would only grow. By the time I was 25, I couldn't find a job anywhere. The most unfortunate thing about my whole situation was that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that's what cost me my job. The company I worked for didn't ask questions and just fired me. To make a long, painful story short, a coworker who I considered a mentor and friend had gotten into some really bad and illegal business. He started bringing that stuff into the office where we worked. I tried to talk to him and I got nowhere. As you could imagine, at one point during the day, I saw him go to the bathroom, and I knew exactly what he was doing. I went into the bathroom to try to stop him or at least confront him, but I didn't get very far. The company must have known he was up to something, and they were watching him. As soon as I walked into the bathroom, not even 2 minutes passed when the owner and security stormed in and escorted us both out of the building. I tried for months to beg for my job back, but to no avail. The cameras only caught me whispering to him, and I have to admit it looked suspicious. When I was 25, I decided it was time to get up and at least try to do something with my life. One of my high school friends worked at the pizza place in my hometown that his family owned. It wasn't glorious, but I desperately needed money, anything to make ends meet. I did this for a while and was shocked at how much money I made in tips. I always thought working nights would be better, but delivering pizza to companies during lunch hour always brought in a considerable amount of tips. One afternoon, as I was about to call it quits for the day, I heard a small argument at the front of the store where the cash register is located. I didn't really rush out or even look at the commotion because the owner was a little unpredictable, and it wasn't uncommon to see him blow up at rude customers. I heard the man yell, "Never again," and then storm out of the store. The voice sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it at the time. After the angry man left, the owner walked into the kitchen where I was standing and looked at me with a smirk on his face. In his Italian-American accent, he said, "Hey, Ronnie, what did you do to that guy? He doesn't like you at all." I shrugged and told him I hadn't seen the guy. He then proceeded to tell me, "The guy saw you walking into the kitchen and said, 'I know that guy. He's bad. He's trouble. Fire him.'" For a couple of days, we laughed about it, and then we forgot about him. The following weekend, I had completely forgotten about him. We got an order to deliver to a location that was just outside of our area, but the customer agreed to pay extra so we could deliver it. Of course, I didn't mind and was happy to take the huge tip. I made the 30-minute drive to a mansion on the outskirts of town. This place was beautiful, the kind of house I always wanted to live in. I approached the huge front doors that were accompanied by 2 large pillars. I rang the bell, and a voice came out of a speaker on the button and said in a muffled voice, "The door is open. Buddy, could you come in and leave the pizza on the counter? I have a broken leg and can't move very well." The voice sounded familiar but was muffled enough that I couldn't tell for sure if I knew it. I walked into the house, and inside was a lot less impressive. It smelled horrible in there and looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. There was trash everywhere, bottles and cans covered the floor, and there were ants everywhere. It was, to say the least, disgusting. I walked into the kitchen and found a spot on the counter to set the pizza box down. I took one last look at the mess of the house. As I turned my head, I noticed a man standing in the doorway on the other side of the room. I barely recognized him at first, but after a second, it was clear. It was my old mentor from my old job. His leg wasn't broken. He was just standing there, staring at me with one hand firmly hidden behind his back. I held my hands up in a defensive position and asked him, "Hey, man, are you okay?" He took a step forward and then stopped, but he said nothing. His eyes were wide open, and it looked like he was about to burst. I started to slowly back away toward the front door, which was about 6 feet from where I was standing. As I slowly walked backward, still keeping eye contact, he finally spoke up and said, "It's your fault. I lost everything because of you. Who reported me?" I tried to talk back and tell him, "Me too. I got fired, but I couldn't find the words." He still wasn't moving much other than a few small steps, and he kept saying, "I blame you, Ronnie. I blame you." I couldn't help but notice the arm behind his back was starting to shake and twitch, and I knew he had something behind his back. I didn't want to find out what it was. I was about a foot from the door. I grabbed the knob, turned it, and ran to my car. As I ran out of the house, I could hear him moving a lot faster now, but I didn't turn around to see if he was chasing me. As I got to the end of the driveway, I turned around and saw him standing at his front door, waving at me with an evil grin on his face. I walked back into the store and told everyone what had happened, and we all laughed about it at the time. I didn't really understand how scary and serious it could have been until recently when I was talking to my girlfriend about my delivery job. She said I was lucky he didn't try to attack me and claims that he probably wanted to, but he was so high on something at the time he couldn't move very well. After talking to her and remembering that look in his eyes, I remember how dark and dead those eyes looked when he stared at me. If anyone ever takes a job delivering pizza to make ends meet, never go in the house, because you might not be as lucky as me to escape. This story happened about 6 or 7 years ago when I was dating my college girlfriend. We were staying at her parents' house while they were out of town for a business conference in Phoenix. She had a lot of pets that needed taking care of, a bunch of fish, a few guinea pigs, and a rabbit. I never realized how much work some of them involved. Chopping lettuce, cleaning cages, and everything else that went into keeping them up. Anyway, the night started out like any other. We were watching TV. Actually, I think we were watching the Disney movie Heavyweights. If any of you are familiar with that movie, there's a scene where the entire camp is feasting on junk food. Once I saw the pizza, I knew that was what I wanted for dinner. Not just any pizza, however, I was craving Papa John's. I love their plain breadsticks and all the different sauces that come with them, and for some reason, that was what I was craving. My girlfriend reluctantly agreed, but asked me to pick it up instead of ordering it for delivery. After taking a look outside, I told her, let's just order it for delivery, since the weather was getting really ugly. It was a mix of sleet, snow, and rain. She agreed but asked me to place the order, and I didn't mind. I called and paid, with the tip included, to just have it dropped off at the door. They said it would take about 30 or 45 minutes to arrive, which seemed reasonable to me. But after an hour and a half, I was getting hungry. I knew the roads were wet, and honestly, I was feeling a little bad for having made the request, since her parents' house was probably about 11 or 12 kilometers from the pizza place. Just as I was starting to resign myself to the fact that the food would never arrive, I saw headlights approaching down the long driveway. But as the vehicle got closer to the house, the lights stayed on with no movement, no one getting in or out. The car was just parked there for a good 5 minutes. I opened the door and waved them down to let them know this was the right place. But still, there was no movement. As the headlights were blinding me, suddenly the lights went out, but the car was not approaching the house. It was driving away. The car was backing up the driveway and heading toward the road. I was both confused and growing hungrier. I called the store and asked about the status of the delivery and if I should cancel it due to the weather. They told me the delivery guy should have arrived by now, as he had left a while ago. My girlfriend also seemed overly worried or anxious about the whole situation. I told her it was no big deal, and if things got worse, we could just make a sandwich or something. Still, I could tell something was wrong and that her mood had changed suddenly. I tried to ignore it and didn't insist. Soon after we put the movie back on, we heard a loud knock on the door. It was like someone was banging on it with all their might. We both jumped up, staring at the door. I told her to stay behind the couch and let me go check it out. I told her I was sure it was just the delivery guy dropping off the food at the door. And she was right, the food was on the porch. I saw no sign of any person or vehicle, which I thought was odd. I brought the food inside and locked the door, then set it on the counter so we could start eating. When I opened the box of breadsticks, there was a napkin inside that looked like it had been written on with a red pen. It said, "I hope you enjoy it. XOXO. I showed it to my girlfriend, and her face turned white. I asked her what was going on and why she was acting weird. Then, she told me one of her ex-boyfriends, Shane, used to work at Papa John's, or maybe he still worked there. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it because I was sure it wouldn't be a problem, but she said she thought the car that had entered the driveway before looked like the car he had, at least the one she remembered from when they were dating. She said that he always used to leave her notes that ended with XOXO, even after they broke up. She said when she decided to leave him, he didn't take it well and started contacting her, not trying to get back together but sending and leaving her letters. She said after she changed her number and made her social media accounts private, she never heard from him again or had any more problems. She didn't really know what to say. I meant that I was sure this was some big coincidence, but I didn't know if it was or not. I told her that whoever had been here was already gone, since there was no person or car outside. I told her that we could skip dinner and go to bed if she wanted, but she said that was okay and that we should eat. About 15 or 20 minutes after we finished eating, we heard another loud crash coming from outside. It sounded like glass or ice being thrown at the sliding glass doors in the kitchen. Again, I told her to stay in the living room while I went to check. The motion sensor light was on in the backyard, but I didn't see anyone or anything. I didn't see anything that could have hit the glass, and nothing was broken that I could see. I asked her if she wanted me to call the police, and she was reluctant. One of her parents would have to be notified, and she said she really didn't have any proof that anyone was there. We decided to go to bed early and try to get some sleep. I knew I wasn't going to get much sleep. My anxiety would definitely keep me up most of the night. Luckily, the rest of the night was quiet. It was 3 a.m., and we hadn't seen or heard anything else. However, to this day, I swear I heard scratching and rustling from about 3 a.m. until the morning. It felt like someone was outside the window, but every time I moved the blinds to look, there was nothing there. In the morning, I chalked it up to animals making noise, maybe to convince myself or feel better about the situation the night before. As far as I know, nothing else happened related to the incident, and my girlfriend at the time never had another strange encounter. We broke up a few years later, but almost every time I order pizza, I think about that night, and half the time, I hope to find a note in my pizza box. This is the most horrifying story that has ever happened in my small, quiet town in Michigan. A story that left a deep scar on all of us who live here and that still keeps me up at night on the darkest nights. What I am going to tell has nothing to do with ghosts or the supernatural. It is a true story of authentic terror that reveals the evil that can hide behind the facade of normality. What scares me the most is not only what happened, but that everything happened a few meters from where I lived. And if it hadn't been for my mother, perhaps we would never have known the truth. We lived in a typical Midwestern town, One of those places where all the neighbors know each other by name and where life goes by at a slow pace. The kind of place where doors are left open without worry and children play in the streets until the sun sets. My family lived on a quiet street, a street lined with old oaks and houses that, although not luxurious, were warm and welcoming. It was the place where I grew up, where I made friends, and where, until that day, I had always felt safe. But everything changed when my neighbor, Gary, revealed a side of himself that no one could have imagined. Gary was the kind of neighbor that always went unnoticed. He lived alone in a house at the end of the street, a house that had seen better days. He was a robust man of about 50 years old, with a face that showed no emotions. He had gray hair and always wore the same expression of boredom and detachment. He never talked much to anyone, and that was fine by us. He wasn't someone to be afraid of, just someone who didn't care to socialize. His house was the only one on the street that did not reflect the community spirit of the neighborhood. While everyone decorated their houses for Christmas or Halloween, his remained unchanged, as if time had stopped there. My mother, Mary, was an intuitive woman, always aware of what was going on in the neighborhood. She wasn't a gossip, but she had a keen sense when something wasn't right. There was always something about Gary that made her uncomfortable, although she could never pinpoint exactly what it was. That man, he never looks happy, my mother used to say, as if that were reason enough to be suspicious. However, we had never had a real reason to worry about him until things started to happen. It started one September afternoon when I was 15. I was in my room doing homework, trying to concentrate on a math problem, when I heard my mother talking on the phone in the living room. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but something in the tone of her voice made me stop what I was doing. She sounded worried, uneasy, something that was not usual in her. I heard her mention Layla's name, and that caught my attention immediately. Layla was a young woman from the town, just a little older than me, who worked as a delivery girl at the local pizzeria. She was a very well-known and loved girl by everyone. She always had a smile on her face, and she was one of those people who seemed to light up the room when she walked in. But a few days ago, Layla had disappeared without a trace. The news had shaken our small town. We all participated in the search, putting up posters with her photo and organizing groups to search the nearby areas. But there was no luck. Layla had simply disappeared, and the police had no solid leads. "What happened to Layla?" my mother asked, almost in a whisper. She seemed to be talking more to herself than to the person on the other end of the line. "It's so strange. Lately, I've been noticing weird things around Gary's house. Noises at night, strange movements. And today, I saw him come out with something big wrapped in a blanket. I don't know. I have a bad feeling." Those words sent a chill down my spine. My mother wasn't someone who imagined things or let herself get carried away by fantasies. If she said something wasn't right, I believed her. But at the same time, something in me wanted to not believe it. I wanted to think that all of this was a coincidence, that maybe Gary was just doing some cleaning around his house or something like that. However, there was something about the way my mother spoke, the concern in her voice, that made my stomach turn. During the following days, my mother's concern only grew. She began to observe Gary's house more closely, commenting on every little strange detail she noticed. For example, she mentioned that even though Gary had always been reserved, lately he seemed more withdrawn than usual. He hardly left his house, and when he did, it was at strange hours, like in the middle of the night or very early in the morning. Plus, he seemed to be accumulating things in his house. One time, my mother watched as he unloaded several heavy boxes from his truck and carried them inside. All of these seemed small and perhaps insignificant individually, but together they made a disturbing picture. One night, while we were eating dinner, my mother dropped her fork and stared out the window that looked out into the backyard. "Did you hear that?" she asked with wide eyes. My father and I exchanged confused glances. "Hear what?" my father asked. My mother slowly got up from the table and walked over to the window, looking out toward Gary's house with a worried expression on her face. "I heard a noise, like a moan or maybe a muffled cry, coming from Gary's house," she said in a low voice, as if she was afraid someone else might hear her. My father got up too and walked over to the window to look out, but everything was quiet and dark. "Must have been the wind, Mary." "There's nothing there," my father said, trying to calm her down, but she didn't seem convinced. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. My mother's words echoed in my head, creating terrifying images in my mind. I decided to get up and look out my bedroom window, which had a partial view of Gary's house. The darkness of the night made it difficult to see anything, but I stayed watching, waiting for some sign, some signal that would confirm or deny it. I saw it, for a brief moment. A light flickered in one of Gary's basement windows. It was dim, almost imperceptible, as if someone was using a flashlight and trying not to be seen. After a few seconds, the light disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I wasn't sure what I had seen, but I knew something wasn't right. I decided to sneak downstairs and found my mother in the kitchen with a cup of tea in her hand. She couldn't sleep either. I told her what I had seen, and her face turned pale. "This can't go on like this," she said with determination in her voice. "Tomorrow, I will call the police." My mother was not one to worry in vain, and the next day, she kept her promise. She called the local police and told them what she had been seeing and hearing over the past few weeks. She described the noises, the strange movements, the accumulation of boxes, and the flickering light in the basement. To my surprise, the officers took her concerns seriously. They told her they would send someone to investigate. That afternoon, 2 police cars arrived on our street and parked in front of Gary's house. My mother and I watched from the window nervously. The officers got out of their vehicles and walked to Gary's door. He came out to greet them, and from our perspective, he seemed calm, almost unconcerned. The police talked to him for a few minutes, and to our bewilderment, they began to walk back to their cars, as if they had found nothing. But then one of the officers stopped, looked at the house, and then said something to his partner. They decided to go back inside, this time with a more serious expression on their faces. My heart began to beat faster as I watched them disappear inside the house. Several minutes passed that felt like hours, and then suddenly the door swung open, and the police came running out, one of them calling for backup on the radio. Gary did not come out with them. Moments later, it was a whirlwind of chaos and confusion. More patrols arrived, followed by a team of detectives and an ambulance. My mother and I watched everything with a mix of fear and amazement, unable to take our eyes off what was happening. After what seemed like hours, they finally brought Gary out, handcuffed with his head down, and put him in one of the police cars. But that was not the worst. The worst was what happened next when they brought someone else from inside the house. At first, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. The figure they brought out was wrapped in a dirty and threadbare blanket, and it was obvious that it had been there for a long time. It was a woman, that was clear, but she barely looked human in that state. Her hair was matted, covered in dirt, and her skin was a pale, almost ghostly tone. Her clothes were torn and barely covered her. But what struck me most was the expression on her face. A mix of confusion, terror, and hopelessness. That woman was Layla. Layla had disappeared 6 months ago. It had been the first news of interest in our small town in years, and we had all participated in the search. They had organized volunteer groups, posters had been posted all over the state, and rewards had been offered for any information on her whereabouts. But nothing had come of it. No one could have imagined that all this time, Layla had been in Gary's basement, just a few feet from where we lived. According to police reports, Layla had been kidnapped while making a pizza delivery one winter night. Gary had stalked her, waiting for her in the dark, and when she approached his house, he had taken her by surprise, forcibly taking her inside. She had been held prisoner in his basement ever since, never seeing the light of day, subjected to an indescribable hell. The officers who found her were traumatized by what they saw down there. Chains, collars, and all kinds of implements that Gary had used to keep her captive and controlled. Layla was malnourished, barely able to stand, and showed signs of extreme physical and psychological abuse. There were scars on her body that told the story of her suffering, wounds that would never completely heal. But what really shook everyone was what Layla told the police after she was rescued. Layla, despite her condition, was able to speak to the detectives and tell them what she had experienced. But what she said was even more disturbing than the capture itself. It was not just Gary who had subjected her to these atrocities. There were other men who came to the house at night, men who participated in her torture, who used her as an object with no human value, men who paid for access to her suffering, who enjoyed the darkness and horror that Gary offered them. What Layla described was a web of evil that extended far beyond our small town. It was like a living nightmare, one in which ordinary people we might have seen at the store or the bank, were engaged in the most despicable acts imaginable. Layla spoke of how these men would come in the dark, their faces masked, their voices soft but full of venom. She never knew their names. She never saw their faces fully, but her memories of those nights will haunt her forever. The fact that there were more people involved, people who had not yet been identified, left our town in a state of paranoia and fear. We no longer knew who these men were. Were they our neighbors? Were they people we had trusted? No one knew, and that uncertainty was scarier than anything. Gary was arrested and put on trial, a long and painful process that brought to light details that made even the strongest among us feel sick. The media covered the trial extensively, and for the first time, our small town became the center of national attention. Everyone wanted to know how a seemingly normal man could have hidden such a dark secret for so long. During the trial, more details about Gary's life came to light. It was revealed that he had been a lonely man from a young age, who had grown up in an abusive home and had never learned to connect with others in a healthy way. But none of that excused what he had done. His crimes were unspeakable, and the judge showed no mercy, sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But even with Gary behind bars, the fear lingered. The scariest thing was that, according to Layla, Gary had not acted alone. There were more people involved, people who were never identified or caught. The police continued to investigate, but they never managed to fully dismantle the network. This fact left our town in a state of constant alert. Every time someone new moved in, or when we saw someone we didn't recognize, we wondered if they could have been involved. The trust in our neighbors, in our community, was broken forever. My mother was hailed as a hero for making the complaint that led to Layla's discovery. The media praised her, the community thanked her, and for a time, she was the center of attention. But she never felt like a hero. Often, at night, I would find her sitting alone in the kitchen, staring into her cup of tea, her face marked with guilt and worry. "If only I had acted sooner," she would often say. "If only I had followed my instinct from the beginning, maybe Layla would not have suffered so much." But we all knew that if it hadn't been for her, Layla would probably never have been found alive. My mother saved a life, and although she always blamed herself for not doing more, we all knew that she did the best she could in an impossible situation. Over time, life in the town returned to a kind of normality, but nothing was the same. Gary's house was empty, a crumbling structure that was now invaded by vegetation. Nobody wanted to buy it or even go near it. It became a constant reminder of what had happened, of the horrors that had been unleashed in our little corner of the world. Years have passed since those events, but the story of Gary and Layla still persists in our town as a constant warning. It is a story that is told to the new residents, a lesson that evil can lurk behind the most common facades, in the people we least suspect. Every time I pass by Gary's old house, I feel a shiver run down my spine. It is a reminder that although Gary is behind bars, fear and mistrust are still present. What affects me most is knowing that although one of the culprits was caught, there are still others out there, somewhere free. What are they doing? Will they have found a new victim? These questions torment me, and it is something that I will probably never know for sure. If I have learned anything from all this, it is that we must be aware, even in the places where we feel the safest. Because you never know what could be going on right next door, at a neighbor's house you thought you knew. And even though Gary is behind bars, there's always that unanswered question. Who were the others? If you ever hear strange noises or see something out of the ordinary in your neighborhood, don't ignore it. Could be a matter of life or death.